Thank you. Testing. Am I being amplified? Which hardly needs to happen, but it's part of the plan. So my name is Russ Altman. Thank you very much for coming to AI in Bloom. That's my name, but there was this beautiful graphic. I hope you got to see it. And I want to point out right away that on your seats, those are not just little pictures. Those are seed packages of California poppies, which, every now and then Stanford does something that makes me really love it. And giving everybody a packet of flower seeds, they've done it again. I've been at Stanford since 1983. I came as a graduate student and did my MD PhD, and then I did my house staff training in the hospital, general internal medicine, and then I joined the faculty. So I've been here continuously pretty much for, 40-something years. And it's a pleasure. I was part of the first AI, what will we call it? Generation, thank you. In the 1980s, when the saying then was knowledge is power, and we built these things called knowledge-based systems, and they were great. And then there was a little bit of what we call the AI winter, and then as you have all seen in the last few years, that winter is quite over, and AI is in bloom. And so the focus today is on biomedical innovation. As you might know, this is a three-part series. I hope you've been able to participate. I'll say now so I don't forget, June 4th will be the third event. This is the second. June 4th will be the third and final event. So a little bit about myself, and then we're going to have some colleagues. And they've been asked to speak for 4 minutes. So please join me in thanking them. I was telling them earlier, I think it was Abraham Lincoln who is attributed to saying, if you want me to talk for an hour, I can do it now. But if you want me to talk for 10 minutes, I'm going to need 2 weeks. And so for 4 minutes, that's even harder. So they've been preparing for months for these talks. And I look forward to them. And I know it's great stuff. So my name is Russ Altman. I'm in many departments. I think it's in the program. But I do some things related to AI that I wanted to mention that I'm proud of, not because of my efforts, but because of the things that are happening here at Stanford. I'm an associate director of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. This is an amazing institute. It's pan-university. It's not just about computer science. It's all the participating schools at Stanford get together to figure out how do we ensure that AI winds up being a net benefit to humanity and not a drag, not a cause of social upheaval, not a cause of existential threat, but a positive. And we have people from arts and sciences, from medicine, from business, from engineering, from the law school, business school, trying to figure that out. It's a great activity. I highly recommend going to HAI, human-centered AI.stanford.edu. Many of you are probably familiar with it. There's programs both online and in person. It's fantastic. Very proud. Secondly, as part of that, I'm the faculty director of something called the AI 100. We have a donor who is not anonymous, Eric Horvitz, who donated money to have a group of people every 5 years assess how AI is doing and what its impact has been on society. Now, we started this in 2009 when AI was like, seems okay. And then we've been writing these reports. Now, there's been 3 or 4 reports where we've chronicled this amazing set of developments that is really having profound impacts on society. Related to the AI 100 report, which is a written report every 4 or 5 years, is something that you may have heard of called the AI Index, which is an annual report that kind of summarizes with metrics and benchmarks the progress of AI in certain areas on certain problems. The problem has been that AI keeps doing so well that the benchmarks keep being solved, like 100% performance, and when you have 100% performance, you throw away the benchmark. I'm really excited that this year we have bulked up the biomedical discovery section of that report. So those of you who've been reading it will notice a slightly thicker report. Some of the people in this room have been working on adding in terms of the progress of AI specifically, both in biomedical discovery and in the delivery of clinical care. And so that's exciting, and that's part of the final thing I want to mention, which is Raise Health, which is a joint effort between HI, the Human-Centered AI Institute, and the medical school, the dean's office. Raise Health is about responsible AI in health. Raise stands for something, and I apologize, I cannot remember what it stands for. The R, I am positive, is responsible. The AI, I would bet the farm, is AI. And I don't know what the other letters stand for. Thank you. Safe and equitable. There's somebody who's paying attention. So Raise Health is a wonderful, and I'm part of a faculty advisory committee to Raise Health. And Raise Health is partnering with the HAI to do this AI index bulking up in medicine. And so we're very excited. And what this tells, and then Raise Health is doing many other things. The idea is Stanford should be a leader in the responsible use of AI in discovery and also in clinical care. We're at the center of Silicon Valley. We have partners who are among the best computer scientists and engineers in general in the world. We have a world-class, I'm pointing to where these people sit. We have a world-class hospital and a world-class biomedical research workforce. And so if we're not going to lead, like who is? And so that's much of what gets us here today. I've already talked too long, so I'm going to shorten my comments about what my lab does, just to say that it's all about drugs. My lab does drugs. How are drugs discovered? How should they be used most effectively, considering the genetic background, the social situation of the patient? How can we make sure that we maximize drugs working and minimize their side effects? And it turns out, which may or may not be obvious, that computational methods are critical to all of that. And so we've had fun for the last 30 years building databases of drug response, understanding the pathways of biology in both health and disease. So the game plan here is very simple and exciting. I'm going to ask each of my colleagues to give the famous 4-minute talk. Then we'll have 4 minutes of Q&A. I'll kind of kick it off, but my other colleagues are welcome to chime in into the discussion. There won't be an official Q&A with you folks, but there will be a session afterwards where we're going to be able to mingle and talk to you about all the things that I'm sure will be exploding in your head. So I think we're going to start with Nima. Take it away, Nima.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm a computer scientist by training. I used to make robots that play soccer before I switched to medicine. That's my daughter up there. I don't know if that's working. She was born at Stanford 5 minutes that way 2 years ago. And it was a complex pregnancy. A long time in the hospital, a chorioamnionitis infection, and an emergency surgery, followed by other complications. One of the unique things about Stanford is that you can walk from there to my lab or to the #1 computer science department in the world 10 minutes away and have a number of very talented AI scientists who can work on these problems. I remember during the surgery asking my colleagues there, how much earlier should I have predicted this infection for you to be able to do something about it? The answer was 2 hours. If we can predict it 2 hours earlier, they can use antibiotics, prevent the whole thing. Went back to my lab and asked them how much sooner we think we can do it. We built a model. Because of the investments that Stanford has made in our data infrastructure, we can do that very quickly. And it turns out that in a head-to-head competition with physicians, we can do that 20 hours faster than them. They ask for 2 hours, we can do it 20 hours faster. And that gives us much needed time to use very safe medications to prevent the entire episode. The surgery wouldn't even be needed. And this is already being implemented in the hospital. This is just one example. Whether you have a baby who was born prematurely and they have a cardiac issue, or you have 100 years old at home who has a very aggressive tumor, when everything else fails, our most effective treatments are often through surgeries. But these surgeries, while they are very effective, they put patients in a very vulnerable position. They can't advocate for themselves, they don't know what is going on, and it comes with a lot of uncertainty. But there are huge opportunities for artificial intelligence algorithms to step in and help with that. We are already in the process of building models that during a surgery can give our surgeons and anesthesiologists a time machine. They can tell them what is going to happen to this patient 5 minutes from now during surgery before it has happened. And one of our very talented fellows, Mark, is somewhere and you will be able to speak with him after the event. In the long run, because of the data infrastructure that we have here, because of the talent that we have, we are well on our way to create a AI-based guardian angel who will be able to watch over you during surgery when you are not there to advocate for yourself. It will be able to speak with you after the surgery when you are not sure what happened and you're trying to understand the context. It will be able to help you before surgery to maximize your chances of success. We are hoping to put all of these together in a single model that understands the context of your health, understands the context of surgery, and can work with the physicians to give you the best chances of coming out of that operating room with the best outcomes possible.
Fantastic. Can you hear me? Just to kick things off, you said a very important thing. You said it's being implemented. You built this algorithm. It's amazing. And you said it's being implemented in the hospital. That cannot be easy. Tell me about what it takes from discovering an algorithm and saying, okay, this looks like it works. I'm sure you got a nice paper out of it. What is the extra bit of work that needs to happen to then have it be a routine part of care in the hospital?
Takes so much effort to get it to that place, and it's a team sport. Nobody can do that by themselves. The technical side of it, of how do you integrate it with the workflows and so on, that's the easy part. The hard part is making sure that it's not, these algorithms are very smart, and sometimes they pick up on what we call confounders, on topics that help you make a prediction, but they are not truly causal relationships. There are small little things that a nurse notices that this patient is in trouble. They put a code in there, and the AI learns that whenever you put that code in there, the patient is in trouble. You have to make sure what the algorithm has learned is truly biologically or medically relevant. You have to make sure that it's not Stanford specific. You have to take it to UCSF. You have to take it to the East Coast. You have to take it to Africa to make sure it's actually working. And you have to partner with the physicians, with the nurses, with hospital leadership to make sure that you're not creating 10 problems while you solve one problem. You have to make sure you're not violating anybody's privacy. You have to make sure everything you do is legal, it's equitable across ages and sexes and races and all the other groups that we need to consider. And only then, one small step at a time, once you have shown that it can safely work, you get to get it a little bit closer to implementation.
Do you have to do that work, or you said it's a team sport? What kind of other people get involved in that process of bringing this to the patients?
Everybody. The hospitals here, both hospitals have an amazing technology development team who are very good at taking an algorithm and get it implemented from a software perspective. You have to work with the industry, you have to work with ethics experts, you have to work with patient advocates, you have to work with physicians and nurses and administration. So it's really truly a large-scale effort to get just one of these algorithms implemented.
Amazing. The other thing you said that caught my eye or ear was you said, I think you said that there was amazing data resources at Stanford that allowed you to do this work. It sounded to me like without even going outside of the walls of Stanford. And is that true? And tell me what you mean when you say amazing data resources at the hospital.
Part of it is just the availability of the data itself. On paper, many institutions have strong clinical data sets for their patients. But in the real world, when we build a model at Stanford and we take it to most other institutions, we end up struggling with data quality, with data availability, and so on. Because of the investments that Dean Miner and others have made in Stanford's infrastructure, we really are at the cutting edge of data quality here. In the example that I shared with you about my daughter, that is a real example. And any investigator at Stanford with a few hours of training can get access to millions upon millions of patients' worth of data in a safe, responsible, anonymized way. So you really can go from an idea, from an insight in your personal life to a working model in a matter of hours.
You also mentioned that one of your concerns is to make sure that it not only works at Stanford, but that it might be exportable to other hospitals that could benefit from the same technology. How does that go? That sounds like it might be tricky because of difference in populations or difference in physician practice patterns. So have you taken that on yet, or is that still future work?
We have certainly done that in some of our projects. In others, it's still future work. But taking it from one institution to another by itself is a big effort and absolutely worth it. So much of medicine is based on culture. How we practice medicine depends on where we trained, when we trained there, and those cultural changes and traditions that we carry around with ourselves in medicine have real consequences that affect these AI algorithms. So even with within the same population, taking a model from Stanford to UCSF by itself often is very, very helpful. But then taking that to a completely different context on the East Coast or in Southeast Asia, that changes everything. Basics of human physiology doesn't change, but just about everything else does. And you have to make sure your models are not getting tricked by those changes.
Well, please join me in thanking Nima for that amazing vignette. Next, I'm going to ask James to both introduce himself and tell us a story.
Well, thanks, Russ. Hi, everyone. I'm James. I am a faculty here in Biomedical Data Science, Computer Science, and EE. And so a big part of my research now in my group is on developing AI scientists, right? So these are sort of AI agents that can help us to make new biomedical discoveries, like finding new drugs or new treatment options. And in that direction, one thing we've been building recently is what we call the virtual lab, right? So it's sort of like a mirror of our physical lab. So in the virtual lab, we have an AI professor. It was like AI professor agent. And under the professor agent, there's actually a bunch of different student agents with different expertise in chemistry, in biology, in pathology, right? And they actually work with the AI professor and also with us to try to make new biomedical discoveries. So different AI scientists, they have their own group meetings. They will meet around and they have these discussions. They also have their own one-on-one meetings where each of the student agent would meet with the professor agent to solve a specific subtask. Right. So one thing is that their meetings are much more efficient than our meetings. Right? Each of their meetings will maybe take a few seconds, so that in the time that we had our coffee break, they had hundreds of meetings. And also the AI scientists, they don't get tired. So we actually run multiple meetings in parallel, basically for the same question. Each question, they actually run 5 meetings in parallel to discuss each topic. And then the AI professor will summarize that into like a consensus. So the AI scientists actually did something quite exciting. So we asked them to basically sort of discover new nanobodies, which are sort of like smaller versions of antibodies to bind to the recent COVID variants. So it's a very challenging problem. And the AI scientists actually came up with their own computational workflow to modify these tools like ESM, protein language models, and AlphaFold. So it's quite a complex workflow that they designed, which is different from what people have done before in previous papers. Right? And then they actually used that workflow to come up with some new nanobody candidates that we haven't seen before. And then we, with our experimental collaborators, we actually make those nanobodies in the real lab and then test it and show that they're actually very promising as binders to some of the recent COVID variants. They're actually much stronger binders, more specific binders than things that nanobodies have been designed by pharma companies before. And I think the remarkable thing here with the virtual lab is that the agents actually made those discoveries relatively quickly, right, on the orders of a few days. The experiments actually took us much longer. So I think that sort of opens up the door of having these AI scientists can really help us to speed up the drug discovery process, also discover new things that we haven't thought of before. The other component of this I think is quite interesting is the AI scientists, they can teach themselves how to become better scientists. Right, so we have this concept that we call the virtual lab school, where let's say if an AI scientist wants to become a better user of AlphaFold or more of an expert on nanobodies, they actually then design their own learning curriculum whereby they go into the PubMed and literature, find all the papers that are relevant for AlphaFold or for nanobodies. Then they will actually read those papers and fine-tune and update their weights based on what they're learning. And then they design their own assessments, quizzes to see how well did they actually learn each of the topics. If they didn't learn it well enough, they'll go back and find more papers and learn and teach themselves. Right, so it's a relatively fast school, also much faster than our schools. So in a span of a day, then they do become a super user and expert in each of these deep scientific domains. Right, so I'm really excited about this possibility then of having this very scalable platform where the AI agents can teach themselves to become more and more powerful scientists and then can complement our expertise, right, and can help with us to really make new discoveries. And I think this also changes how we interact with AI. right? Because most of the time in the past, when we think about AI, it's really as a tool for solving a relatively narrow and specific problem, right? But now with these agents, we can really have the possibility of AI not just as a tool, but really as a teammate that can help us work with us much more closely across much more diverse and more open-ended R&D problems, which can be a paradigm shift for the field.
Fantastic. First question. Many of us are familiar with ChatGPT. It's a single kind of agent where you can ask it questions. Tell me how you do you literally have multiple instantiations of a chatbot like ChatGPT? And how are they actually built? Is it on ChatGPT or is it on one of the more open source models? And how expensive is it to get it to do all these things?
Yeah, great question. So under the hood of the agents initially, right, so it could be a ChatGPT model. They can also be an open source model. And then after they go through the virtual lab school, when they read these papers and fine-tune and update their weights, then each of these agents now become like a different model because they have different weights, they've read different papers, they have different expertise. Right, so then the way that they interact is similar to how we would interact maybe like in a Zoom meeting type thing, right? They'll actually, the professor agent would say, here's the set of the questions that we want to answer, and then each of the individual agents would sequentially contribute their ideas on how to answer that question. We actually also put in a critic agent to every meeting, sort of like a reviewer too, that participates in every meeting. Their job is to actually give sort of a, somewhat negative feedback to the other agents to keep them grounded and not to get too wild.
So I've seen this paper. It's very inspiring. And that was my favorite innovation. So can you talk a little bit more? We had a brief chat right before the event started. Tell us a little bit about how you've experimented with like the best kind of critic, who's useful, who's just a pain in the neck and not very useful. How did it go?
One of the interesting things is that we also see the virtual lab almost like a social science experiment, right? Because when the virtual agents, they have discussions, some sort of interesting social dynamics evolve where the agents can disagree with each other. They have to come to some resolutions. And often, when the agents have disagreements, they're actually much more polite about it than we do. But their personalities come through, right? And to Russ's question, we experiment with having agents with different personalities to see how does that actually affect the quality of the science that they do. And it actually turns out that, for example, for the critic, if you actually have a critic that has a little bit more neurotic, right? So think like the George Costanza of critics. That ends up being actually quite useful to have like a George as your critic. But you don't want to have a George for every scientist, right? You also have some Jerry and Elaine, different personalities to actually lead to like the optimal virtual team that can lead to the fastest discoveries.
And how do you get a model to be George Costanza? Do you just give it instructions? Do you say you're a nervous Nelly, you're always worried about people going after you? How do you even like do those experiments?
Yeah, so there are different ways we can actually modify the personality and also the knowledge of the agent. So one way is that we can give it sort of examples. For example, like how would George talk in different settings, where you can look at different transcripts and examples. The other, that's what people call the in-context learning. You actually put those examples into sort of the memory or the context of these ChatGPT type models. The other way we can do it is actually then to more deeply ingrain those personalities to actually to update the weights of those models through more specific fine-tuning.
Are these, it's a very exciting, as an engineer, I like what you've done because it's modular. So if the professor isn't performing well, you already said, like George probably beat out different other critics that just weren't as good. So do you imagine a library of these? Is this like a research, are we thinking about a research reality in the future where you have a library of different agents that have different expertise and that you can mix and match them to more quickly build a new system?
That's exactly right. Yeah, so we're envisioning that there will be hundreds of these agents, each with deep expertise in different sub-areas of medicine and technology and AI. And then for each new problem that we might encounter in biomedical research, right, then we can quickly assemble sort of the relevant task force of the different AI agents that have the relevant expertise to best complement the human researchers to solve that problem.
So thank you to James. Finishing up the stage to my right is Alice Adams. Alice, please introduce yourself and tell us your story.
Hi, I'm Elise. I am.
Elise, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'm a professor in health policy and epi and population health, and by courtesy in pediatrics. So, for a second, I want you guys to all. Some of you may be oncologists, but I want you to imagine you're an oncologist, and you're excited about your day because you're about to tell one of your patients who's really been struggling with cancer that they're cancer-free after all these chemotherapy treatments. They come in to see you, but guess what? There's a problem. Despite your elation about the fact that you've cured their cancer, they come in and tell you that those painful sort of electric shock type feelings that they had in their hands and their feet during their chemotherapy treatments, well, they've gotten worse and they've persisted. And now they're having trouble doing simple things like holding a mug, going to work, or even sometimes taking a walk with their kid. And approximately 6 out of 10 cancer patients will experience some form of this called neurotoxicity or nerve damage related to chemotherapy, very common types of chemotherapy. For many patients, it will be very mild. They might not even notice it during their treatment, and it goes away the second the treatment's done. However, there's some exceptions. One is people who have it so severely that they actually have to either reduce the chemotherapy dose or stop it altogether for a time while they recover. The second are people who have these symptoms and they persist well beyond the chemotherapy treatment. Unfortunately, we don't have a really good way for clinicians to know ahead of time which patient is going to have these really sort of catastrophic events. And the challenge with neuropathy in particular is that there's no approved preventative agent for it. Secondly, the long-term neuropathy, the stuff that persists after your chemotherapy is over, we really don't have a cure for that. And third, that the treatments that we use to try to treat that neuropathy, honestly, they don't work for a lot of people. So it's this story that it's a real story. It's affected oncologists and patients every day. One of my oncologist colleagues came to me when they heard we were doing predictive analytics and AI, and she knew I was interested in neuropathy. She pulled me aside and she said, please help us. This is the area where we need AI because it's devastating. Right? I'm like, I want to celebrate that I've saved your life, and here I have done something that's going to disable you. So we're excited about the potential for AI to help us in this way. Let me give you one example where it's helping us. In animal models, we call them preclinical studies, where people working with mice are currently looking for specific agents that might help not only treat neuropathy, but they're trying to understand what are the mechanisms by which neuropathy comes about in the first place in order to identify novel treatments. And so one of the things that we're doing now is we're working with patients and clinicians and just a diverse group of people to really think about how can we identify these patients using AI. So we're developing huge models using lots of electronic medical record from Kaiser Permanente, from Stanford, from Sutter, to really understand what are the factors that contribute to someone's risk and how might that be used. What's been amazing to us is working directly with patients and clinicians. They've helped us to understand that you talked before about this issue of how do you get it implemented. Because we've involved them from the very beginning, from the writing of the grant all the way through, they've helped us identify the ethical concerns, some of the practical concerns, some of the other things that come up in the application of these algorithms. Being here at Stanford, we've been able to work with incredibly multidisciplinary groups, including some people like Dr. Miriam Goodman, who studies cellular and molecular physiology and trying to understand those mechanisms and identifying targets for treatment. We're working with her to build that into what we're doing in AI to help us understand, okay, if we see treatments that are already available, but for other reasons other than cancer, how can we leverage those in order to identify those patients at high risk and then maybe recruit them for clinical trials that have the potential to affect and to prevent this particular outcomes for these patients. So we're really excited about this work. We're blessed with amazing trainees, a couple of whom, Margot and Miriam, you've already met today, who are helping us, again, bring their own different perspectives to this work and helping us to really think about how we can improve the lives of many patients, one, hopefully to prevent this condition, but also to think about how can we leverage AI, and particularly generative AI, to think of new ways of developing care plans over the life course for these individuals who happen to have this particular side effect of chemotherapy.
Thank you. So a very important problem. I am very aware of it. And one of the questions is, how did you decide? So you had this great moment where your friend came to you and said, we need help. But as a scientist, you have to decide, is this the right problem in the right time? Is the data available? Will I be able to help? How did you do that calculation?
Absolutely. Well, she came to me because we'd already been doing this work in neuropathy related to diabetes. And I happened to be bragging about this great algorithm that we developed, and then also saying simultaneously, but darn it, no one's going to use it for all sorts of reasons that we hadn't anticipated ahead of time. We were so busy building the algorithm, we forgot to look up and ask if anyone wanted it.
Was it a similar neuropathy for
It was
diabetic?
predicting. It was actually for people who have a new diagnosis of peripheral neuropathy, who have diabetes. In the next 2 years, we wanted to know who was going to have a foot ulceration, have some sort of bone infection, who might have gangrene, and then eventually lose their limb. It turns out, unfortunately, more people than we'd like have that happen within 2 years of that first diagnosis. The model worked perfectly. The challenge was it wasn't based in reality of what clinicians could actually do in practice. So I was giving this sort of talk about, I'm so happy about the algorithm, I'm so bummed that people aren't ready to use it. And that's when she came to this question, and I said, aha. Here we have an issue where the clinicians want something for a specific issue. For her was with severe neuropathy that stops chemotherapy, and she had a plan already for where she would put it. And I said, okay, now we're starting in a different place, and we can restart and really think about this in a new clinical context.
And is I think you mentioned Stanford, but also others. So similar to my question to Nima, it sounds like you had to go outside of Stanford to get the full data set. And how does that work? I know a little bit about data sharing, and people are not always, here's my data. It sounds like you have a very meritorious research project.
So, yeah, they don't do that. But I actually worked at Kaiser Permanente for 12 years before I came here, and they still like me even though I left. And so we actually wrote this grant there, and we're able to continue the work. And we actually able to just portal it directly into their data systems. It's fantastic, right? So we actually portal directly in. We work with the data. The data never leave Kaiser Permanente. It's a wonderful way to be able to have access to that real data. The other thing we're doing is we're leveraging something called OncoShare with Dr. Allison Kurian, and so one of her colleagues at Sutter have put together a similar data resource specific to breast cancer and colorectal cancer patients that goes back, I think, 20 years, and they've merged the data across the two EMRs. So we're able to use that data now and apply similar methodologies that we've already started to use at Kaiser Permanente.
Great. Now, the other thing that I heard you say was about using LLMs to come up with clever new ways to to find new targets, and that kind of is very exciting. So can you just go into a little bit more detail about how something like ChatGPT might help you get a new idea for a scientific experiment or approach?
Oh, wow, that's a fantastic question. So I should back up to say that I've been thinking about these issues because our patients come to us. And for some of our first meetings, we were talking about this algorithm. I was focused on how can we help you manage your symptoms better? And one of my colleagues, Juanita Waugh, she's a cancer survivor and just a cancer warrior. And she said to me, at least stop. What we want you to do is prevent it from happening in the first place. So I said, oh, that makes sense, right? So luckily, one of my colleagues at the Stanford Cancer Institute works in that specific space. She tries to understand how it happens in the first place and can you stop it from happening. And she does that, believe it or not, using roundworms. So these are very, very tiny little worms that apparently are full of nerves, and she's able to evaluate how the chemotherapy works for them, specifically the molecular pathways by which it actually develops, and then we are able to target potential therapies. So the idea of bringing in LLMs came from patients again. So we were talking about some of the things that we were doing, and I was interviewing some patients, and one of them saying, have you ever thought about, doing this? And we thought, we hadn't. And so now we are. And so this is amazing way in which these patients give us these ideas. We bring them into the research team. They publish with us. They give us wonderful ideas, and they help continue the work and help us think outside the box. Think of ways we wouldn't normally go down that path if we were left to our own devices.
Thank you, and thank you to Elise for sharing this. It is very difficult not to have every one of these conversations go for 30 minutes. I just wanted to say that. I think we're going to Mildred, my colleague Mildred Cho, who please identify yourself and tell us what's up.
Okay, so my name is Mildred Cho. I'm at the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics, and I have appointments in the departments of pediatrics and in medicine. I also feel a little bit like George Costanza. Maybe I'm the George Costanza of the group, but
We just heard how valuable George is.
I'm happy that, you're letting me sit up here. But I will come back to some of the things that you said, because my bioethics head is just like latching on to a lot of things that you said that have to do with my work. And so the thing that I think is really interesting is that AI, obviously, we've heard these great examples of how it can do a lot of things that are just amazing. It can predict, it can identify, it can diagnose, it does all these things. But it can also, those things can also be used to do some harmful things. So any technology can be used for good, and it can also be used for bad. And part of the using it for something bad, it could be intentional, it could be unintentional and not know it. And so one of the things I've been doing is to talk with people who are developing AI in medicine to understand how much do they know about the potential harms that could become unintentionally, perhaps, or intentionally, when used by a nefarious actor. And how aware are they of those things? And do they feel responsible for trying to mitigate those harms before they happen, right? And I think Nima and Elise, you actually were really really good examples of what would be like my ideal AI developer, right? When I talk to them, when I've interviewed them in the field, people at companies, local and all over the country, who are working on products that are actually being used in hospitals right now, I found that many of them can actually anticipate a lot of different harms to patients, to clinicians, to healthcare systems even. So that wasn't a problem. But the problem was in having them actually embrace the idea that they had some responsibility to predict what those harms were, to understand how they might be able to avert those harms before they happen in their AI design. And I think Nima and Elise, actually, you're really good examples of some of the things that we found in designing exercises to encourage AI developers to actually identify harms and then actually move them to a place where they feel like they need to take responsibility, to morally engage with the work that they're doing. And I think the way in which you have demonstrated that is that we found that an effective way of doing that, which we can do in a group exercise with AI developers on Zoom in 90 minutes by giving them scenarios that essentially force them to take different perspectives and incorporate those different perspectives into their design. So to take the clinician's perspective on a tool, an AI tool, to take a patient's perspective on an AI tool. And I think what you said was you have a deep understanding of, as a clinician, of what is an important problem and how do I solve it. And then you also have understandings either from your own personal experiences with your family members or from talking to patients, what is a good problem, what are things that we want to avoid, what are things that you want to avoid in your patient care. And so you were actually automatically doing what we found we could achieve by essentially, having people go through this exercise to take alternate perspectives and get them to the point where they would say, oh, I will change how I do my development of my AI. I will change how I access data. I will change the types of data that I will use, and I understand how to do that. And it actually, I was very skeptical before that would actually do anything, that it seemed like a very light touch type of intervention, but it's actually remarkably effective, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. So I think you all are just validation of what we found.
So that is, thank you very much. And obviously the ethical, and I'm surprised because I know your expertise is in ethics, you teach ethics, and I thought you were going to say, I taught these folks, these AI developers, ethics, and that's not what you said. And I'm sure you considered it. Tell me tell me about that calculation, about like teaching them about consequentialism and Kant and all of this stuff versus practical, and how do you make it sticky so that it's not just this project, but like for the rest of their career?
Yeah, well, we don't know that yet. That's our next step, is to kind of deploy this in real world, live, real-time situations. But we did make a calculation. Actually, we didn't even use the word ethics or ethicists or anything in our conversations because people get very defensive. They're like, I'm an ethical person, don't call me bad. I'm not one of those people. And so we didn't want people to get defensive. We just wanted to find a way that we could get people to just change their thinking, change their attitudes without having them, feel like there was
I'm going to guess that this also leads to better AI systems. I don't know if you evaluated that, but considering all the users, the impact on those users, taking their perspective, that's kind of good user interface design, good system design. I don't know if you studied whether the actual outputs got better.
No, that's our next step. But people did mention, they said, really this is what we should be doing anyway. We should be understanding the user perspective, but taking it a little bit further in terms of not just the user interface, but like how is it actually going to impact patients? And
Okay.
so, but in terms of the education part and teaching them ethics, I just wanted to give a shout out to Quinn Weiss, who's sitting over there, who's working with me on this, because one of the things we are going to try to do is take this approach, this perspective-taking approach, and integrate it into education of computer scientists in class, and we can use hypothetical scenarios and case studies and that sort of thing, but having them sort of adopt these other approaches is something that we think will be effective in education.
So here's a killer question, and I know you've thought about this. How good are LLMs at ethics?
Yes.
Because I'm going to ask James to build me an ethics critic.
Oh, there you
And
go.
how would that go? I think you have some, do you have some data on this? Can they do ethical reasoning?
We do. I'm not sure that they can do ethical reasoning yet. And part of that is because I think, it's probably difficult for LLMs to sort of understand the nuances of philosophical, argument and position taking, because there's probably not a whole lot of that in the training set out there on the internet. So, yeah, it's got some work to do, but we're trying to figure out ways to basically, help out with maybe agents that can be the ethics colleague to help out the other agents learn how to read ethics.
Okay, great. So that's time, and thank you very much, and please join me in thanking Mildred. Tom Montine is next. Tom, who are you, and what do you do?
Hi, good evening. My name's Tom Montine. I'm the chair of the Department of Pathology here at Stanford. And what I'll be describing to you this evening is work that James and I did together. So what's pathology? We typically operate in the work in the background. So many people don't know. We're the laboratory specialty of medicine. So anything that comes out of a patient, any fluid, any cell, any tissue, comes to us for cellular and molecular analysis. And so when the doctor says to you, oh, well, we're waiting on the test results, that's us working. Right?
That's very honest of you.
You're welcome. So there, just to give you an idea, right, pathology is a big undertaking. Stanford is a medium-sized healthcare system. Our pathology laboratories run over 20 million tests per year with a top-line revenue of over $1 billion. And so across the United States, this is a huge activity. Pathology is doomed to fail. And the reason is that we are entering an era of historic, first in the history of humankind, change in the demographics of the population, right? I'm a baby boomer. I look around the room, and many of us in here, we are entering a phase of life where consumption of healthcare increases 10x. Right? So over the next 30 years, the demand for pathology services will increase exponentially. The number of pathologists that we're training is flat. So the system is going to fail. For the last century, we've responded to, more samples, make more pathologists. It simply won't work. And I had this spiel with James one day and said the only way out of this is to innovate. And so we began to build an AI tool to solve this problem. Now, we're not the only ones with this idea. There are companies around the country, around the world, who have built AI tools to take some of the pathology work, but we believe that they've made some fundamental errors. So what are the limitations of what we as a healthcare system could buy today but have decided not to buy because we don't think they're especially useful? Well, the essence of it is that these tools are very expensive. They've been trained in a way that requires thousands of cases to be diagnosed by dozens, if not hundreds, of unknown pathologists to build the training set. This unknown pathologist part becomes crucial as I work towards the end of this list. They're not generalizable from organ or tissue sites, so much of pathology is done to evaluate how best to treat patients with cancer, right? So these AI tools that others are building are focused on a particular site. So you can buy a tool to help with diagnosis of colon cancer, and a different tool for the diagnosis of lung cancer, and a different tool for breast cancer, and a different tool for prostate cancer, right? So we envision one tool that will work across organ sites. They're poorly portable, and this has just been the data that's come back as these tools are built and refined at one site, as Nima was alluding to earlier. They perform poorly when ported to another site. There's limited shelf life because they're built on consensus criteria, and those consensus criteria evolve, right? There's no human in the loop. There's no feedback in these systems. So the pathologist is presented with what the AI predicts the most likely diagnosis is. But imagine that you're that pathologist then. Who's going to take the medical liability for that diagnosis? It's a major issue in this country, less so in other countries, right? Is it the unknown pathologist who trained the model? Is it the computer scientist who built the model? No, it's the pathologist who's going to sign his or her name to the report. So this is why we don't purchase these models, because the pathologists look at us and they say, well, I'm going to have to evaluate these slides anyhow, because I'm the one that's taking all the liability risk. So after speaking with James, and we recruited an outstanding postdoc who's now an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania, we built a tool that we call Nuclei.io. Nuclei.io has several advantages. I think we solved many of these problems. First, it's based on features of nuclei, not of a cell type. And that's important. Nuclei are in every cell, except red blood cells, right? So with one exception, there's a nucleus in every cell. So this model is applicable to every cell type, except one type of cell in your blood, right? So it works just as well on colon cancer as it does on lung cancer, on breast cancer, prostate cancer. It works just as well as finding inflammatory cells in the endometrium, right? So it's agnostic to tissue type. There's a human in the loop. The way it works is solving the problem of needle in a haystack. So much of the work that pathologists do is finding rare cell types hidden. So a half dozen cells hidden within 1 million cells in the biopsy. This tool is trained by the pathologist to find that cell type. The way it works is that you launch it on the biopsy. Instead of me having to spend 2 hours reviewing every single cell looking for those 1 or 2 micrometastases, it draws my attention to them immediately and asks me, yes, no. And very quickly, within 3 hours, we train each individual pathologist, not some unknown pathologist somewhere train the model. Each individual pathologist can train the model. We share the models with each other so experts can lend them their models to people who are less expert, teachers to students. Students can use it as like an examination. How well does it perform? So we built this. we ran 2 clinical studies, just to give you some statistics. So pathologists using nuclei IO had a 110% increase in accuracy. They had a 62% reduction in time spent on evaluating biopsies. And because they gained greater confidence, diagnostic confidence while using the algorithm, they ordered 69% fewer follow-up tests. So the way we describe it to people, we've created this tool to address the problem of a shortage of pathologists that make pathologists safer, faster, cheaper.
Other than that, they're no good. Thanks so much. Your story gives me an excuse to ask a question that I've been meaning to ask but haven't had a chance, which is the regulatory pathway. So there's this thing called the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, through which many diagnostics and treatments go through. Have you had to deal with FDA in thinking about the future of this tool? And is the path clear, or do we need progress there?
Thank you, Russ. So I should have mentioned that because of the success we had when we ran these clinical studies at Stanford, Stanford Healthcare System has a program called Catalyst to try to take healthcare innovations to commercialization. So nuclei IO is now part of the Catalyst program. We are told, although we have not yet spoken to the FDA about this, but I chair a panel at the FDA. I have a pretty good idea what's going on at the FDA, but I don't work much in devices and not at all in AI. That because we're not producing a diagnosis, we're drawing the pathologist's attention to the cells that pathologist said he or she wanted to see, that this does not fall under FDA regulation.
And that answers my next question, which is, are you going to get them to be able to sign? Will they feel comfortable signing? But since they're drawing the attention, they're looking at it, they're making the call, they're presumably going to be comfortable with that signature.
Right, so it's not just a human in the loop, it's that specific pathologist in the loop. Right?
Great. Well, we're tight for time, but thank you to Tom for that story. And finally, I'm happy to introduce Roxana. And Roxana, could you introduce yourself and tell us about dermatology?
I'm not talking about dermatology today, but I'm Roxana Donishju. I'm a physician scientist. I'm an assistant professor in biomedical data science and dermatology. And we're going to end, we started with a personal story, we're going to end with a personal story. So do we have the photo up? That is my daughter. She is 6 years old. Over the summer, she went on the monkey bars, fell off, and broke her arm. And I am the one who got that fateful call from the school, your daughter fell, she's crying, please come pick her up. Immediately as a physician, I could tell something was wrong. And I said, we are going straight to the emergency room, which she didn't care for, as evidenced by the fact that she screamed the entire way there. When we got to the ER, they were trying to do the evaluation. She was not cooperative. My husband showed up with our baby. I don't remember, he was maybe like 6-7 months old at that time. So I took the baby outside because they said ER does not allow babies in. And of course, I'm on My Health. How many of you guys have My Health? Raise of hands. I'm on My Health because I know that test results are going to appear before the doctor has time to review them. And
Thank you, Tom.
Yes. So I saw the radiology report, and I could tell from the report that there was a fracture, but I could not tell, even as a physician, is this a bad fracture? Is this the kind of thing that's going to need surgery? Oh, how bad is this? So I'm furiously, being a physician, copying that report, texting it out to all my radiology friends, saying, can you interpret this? Message an orthopedic surgeon. What does this mean? And, I was just, because I couldn't interpret it. Later, we get the discharge summary with patient instructions. On the patient instructions, it says, give your child 1,000 milligrams of Tylenol every 4 hours. Oops. That would put a 40-pound child into liver failure. As a physician, I immediately caught that error. But just for fun, I copied the whole thing into ChatGPT and said, is there anything wrong with this? And ChatGPT identified that the dosing of the Tylenol was incorrect. So as a physician scientist, this got me thinking, if I, as a MD, PhD, the most annoying type of patient and parent, cannot navigate this healthcare system, how are our patients supposed to do this? And so, large language models are very impressive. They can do impressive things like find the Tylenol mistake, but they also are not perfect. And in fact, in work that could only be done at Stanford, my lab brought together 80 interdisciplinary computer scientists, physicians, biomedical data scientists, and had them stress test different large language models on real healthcare scenarios, and found that while they do pretty well, they're wrong about 20% of the time. So something that's wrong 20% of the time isn't ready to be given to help our patients navigate the healthcare system. But that is what our team is going to do, is to fix that problem. So my team, which is a very, again, only at Stanford, an interdisciplinary team of computer scientists, MD, PhD students, biomedical data scientists, have come together, and we are building patient-facing chatbots. We are building prompt engineering tools that can optimize teaching the chatbots how to behave so they make less errors. We're building automatic evaluation agents, so other chatbots which will vet the responses that they have before the chatbot actually responds in order to increase that accuracy. And as we have been doing this, we have been talking to nurses, to patients, to physicians to figure out everything that they need to, make this chatbot work well, so that from the moment you touch that healthcare system, any report you get, any instructions you get, you're able to ask questions about it 24/7. It will be able to tell you when you need to contact your doctor because there's something that might be concerning. So that is the goal of our lab. So my daughter told me, you might have noticed, she had a red cast. She said, next time I break my arm, I would like a purple cast. I said, Mommy's heart cannot take a next time. However, if there is a next time, my hope is that that whole process would be a lot smoother, because we will have these accurate, fair chatbots that can help answer questions about medical reports, about instructions, and just make that whole process smoother.
Thank you, Roxana. So many things to ask, but when you did this analysis with your 80 best friends,
Yes.
the interdisciplinary group, what kind of mistakes was it ChatGPT?
So we tested actually several versions of ChatGPT.
Do they
Yes.
make the same kind of mistakes? Is it
No.
random? Tell us about the mistakes.
Yeah, so actually it's very interesting because we tested GPT 3.5, GPT-4, GPT-4 with internet, which we thought would do better because it has access to the internet. It did not actually do that significantly better. And then, of course, the newer models like O1, which there's been some improvement. And what's interesting is the models make slightly different. I'll give you some examples. So, like, there's a scoring system for drug eruptions in dermatology. So I brought it back to dermatology.
All right, I knew it would get
Yes.
to dermatology.
And like, this is a very complicated score. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how to do it, but somebody put in a patient vignette with the labs saying, hey, can you calculate the score for this patient so we know how high risk they are for this drug eruption? And the model explains it so well. And in the middle, it actually scores a thing wrong, and you would have never caught it because it was just so embedded and everything looked so correct that, you would miss it. So there's mistakes like that, which we don't want to make. There are mistakes of bias where we gave it a patient note that we had created, and it had the patient's profession in there, and the model assigned not a race that was never mentioned based on the fact that they thought, oh, the patient's an engineer. So things like, yes. So mistakes like that. There are so one other thing is like medical summarization, like please take this complex medical stuff and summarize. In a patient who has high blood pressure, the model would hallucinate that they are on a blood pressure lowering medication when they were not.
Wow.
So these are the kinds of mistakes that we can't have happen. And that's why, it's not as easy as plug and play with what's out there already, but we're building tools to make it work better.
Great. So one other final question is one of the things that people learn when they are sick is how to navigate the healthcare system. It's nothing about medical knowledge. It's knowing which clinic to
Yes.
call. Is that going to be part of your effort, or is that kind of future work to be done?
So not as the initial, like our first effort is to make, whether you get that pathology report from Tom after do a skin cancer biopsy, because our patients are always like, what does this even mean? Or, the patient instructions. First, make those things that are happening daily in the healthcare system more understandable and allow people to be able to ask questions 24/7 about it. And then the next level is exactly this, having AI patient navigators.
Great. Well, thank you to Roxana. And thank you. I'm going to stand up. Please join me in thanking all of my colleagues. I think it goes without saying that these are the 6 best, but we have hundreds of other colleagues who are doing amazing things, and it's quite an exciting time to be at Stanford Medical School for many reasons, including the work that's happening in AI. I am now supposed to close the program. I'm supposed to invite you to speak with our faculty and our trainees who are at their tables during the reception. There is new food back here. There might still be the old food in the back, but it's all here. It's all here. And are we going to mostly stay in here? Thank you. They're making gestures. And I will remind you that June 4th is the final installment of our AI in Bloom series. Thank you so much for coming. This has been great. Thank you to my colleagues. And please enjoy the rest of the evening.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.